Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Saturday, December 7th slate of college football DFS on DraftKings as well as FanDuel. That is right, it is finally Conference Championship Saturday. And I got to say, this Conference Championship week kind of has a different vibe from most Conference Championship weeks. You know, in the era of the 4-team playoff, it was always like, hey, I need to win this game if I want to be in the college football playoff. Whereas now with the 12-team playoff, it's like, okay, am I better off losing this game and getting the 5 seed or the 6 seed? Am I better off not playing this game so that way nobody gets hurt and I don't lose positioning? Like, it's a very weird feeling knowing that some of these teams, you know, yes, they're playing for the pride of a conference championship, but they got to have that feeling in the back of their mind like, wait a minute, we're already in the college football playoff. What are we exactly doing here? So it's a weird week of football. But anyway, there is DFS to be played. And so we are going to break down all 6 games of the DraftKings and FanDuel DFS slates, tell you what you can expect from each game, as well as who needs to be in or out of your DF lineups in each game in order to help you build some winning lineups on this last big-time Saturday of college football DFS. Now, if you have not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We will be doing college football all the way through bowl season, so you can be here with us for all that. And also, we've got some college basketball content now as well, because we do love college basketball here as well. And we're going to be covering that all the way up until the Final Four. If you love playing college football DFS, a lot of the same skill sets apply to college basketball DFS. It is not like NFL or NBA where there is like a ton of optimizer and sim guys out there. You can very much still do a little bit of research, play the best plays, and have winning lineups in college basketball DFS. So check that out if you have not already. I highly advise you to do so. But anyway, we're a minute and 45 seconds in. Let's go ahead and get started. We got 6 games to break down. Let's go ahead and get all right, this Saturday slate starts off with one last hurrah for Maction. Our beloved Maction season finally comes to an end with the MAC championship game, which is being played in Detroit between, in my opinion, after watching all of the Maction this past month, the 2 best teams in the MAC, which is Ohio versus Miami, Ohio. Currently, the spread is Miami minus 2.5 points with a game total of 44.5, which is one of the lowest totals on this slate. That means the implied total is about 23-21 in favor of the Redhawks. Now, what's interesting about this one is, in my opinion, these are the 2 best defenses in the MAC, but they're also 2 of the better offenses in the MAC. So it's really a question of what is going to win out, defense or offense. I could certainly see this game shooting out because there are playmakers all over the field on the offensive side of the ball in this one. In fact, the last time these 2 teams played, Miami won 30-20. So, you know, with there being 50 points scored in that game, there's definitely potential for more points to be scored here in this one. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the Ohio side. So how Ohio is going to try to score points is by running the football. They rank 11th in the nation in rush rate. And Miami is a slightly better pass defense than rush defense. They rank 12th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game, 34th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game. So this is kind of a good mesh of styles where Ohio is going to try to run the ball and Miami is more easily scored on via the run. So Parker Navarro is Ohio's quarterback, and he has been on a tear. 3 straight games over 29 DraftKings points, 2 of which were over 43 DraftKings points. Just massive performances. And a big reason why is because he has ran for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in each of the last 3 games. He is a big-time part of this running offense, and if this Ohio rushing offense is going to have success, it's going to be because he's able to do some running as well. Now, when you look back in the game log, against Miami, when they played in Week 8, he only accounted for 5.32 DraftKings points. That is because about halfway through the game, he got benched. He had 2 interceptions in that game, was not effective through the air, only 88 yards passing. On the ground, he had 11 carries for 38 yards, which is just kind of meh. So not really successful in that game, only 5 DraftKings points. They benched him mid-game for Nick Polos, who ended up coming in and scoring 14.62 DraftKings points. So if you add both of them together, that's about 20 DraftKings points. That's actually not a super terrible total. It's certainly not like the black eye that this 5 looks like on Parker Navarro's game log. So because of the rushing upside, and because I think this game has a ton of upside as well, Parker Navarro is certainly going to be one of my favorite quarterbacks in my player pool. Honestly, there's a lot of really inept passing offenses here on this slate, and you don't really have to worry about that with Navarro because he's just going to run the ball as well as pass it. I really do like him as a play. At the running back position, Anthony Tyus was injured for part of the season for this Ohio team, but now he is back. He is the workhorse running back. The only thing that concerns me is he's kind of been vultured a little bit by his own quarterback, Parker Navarro, right? Like those last 3 games that we talked about where Navarro went off, the best game that Anthony Tyus had was 21.5 against Toledo, which was also one of the best defenses in the MAC. But he does have a ton of upside. We've seen him go off before. He has a high of 27.8 this season. In the game earlier in the year against Miami, Ohio, he only had 8 carries, 15 yards, and a touchdown. touchdown. But keep in mind, that was a game where they were playing from behind most of the way. And with the benching of Parker Navarro, they just never really got their offense going. So I do think Anthony Tyus is an option. I don't think I would play Tyus and Navarro together because of the fact that they're kind of stealing each other's upside in terms of the rushing touchdowns. But I do think that Tyus is absolutely in play and going to be in my player pool. At the wide receiver position, the good news is this is a super condensed target tree. When Ohio has success throwing the ball, it is usually to Coleman Owen, who in his last 5 games has 2 of them over 34 DraftKings points. He is the absolute target monster in this offense. Now, granted, they don't have a whole lot of passing volume to begin with, but when they do have volume, it's going to Coleman Owen. In that first game against Miami, Ohio, he only had 2 for 12, but again, that was a weird game where they benched their quarterback and just didn't have a whole lot of success offensively. So I really am just willing to write that one off and just still consider Coleman Owen a pretty strong play at $7,100. Now, the only other 2 guys they really throw to in this offense are Chase Hendricks. Is one of them. He had 5 for 50 against Miami, Ohio in that first game. And then Rodney Harris, the second, he was their leading receiver in that game. He had 7 for 82 against Miami, Ohio. So those are really the only guys that I would even remotely consider. But Coleman Owen is by and large like the target leader here in this one. And I really, really think you can just build an Ohio stack around Navarro and Owen and not worry about Hendricks and Harris. Now, the Miami, Ohio side is really interesting. The good news is for them is they have a super, super condensed offense, right? And this Miami offense is going to look to do it via the pass. They rank 38th in the nation in pass rate, which, again, is a good mesh stylistically with what Ohio does defensively. Ohio really shuts down the run. They rank 4th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game, and they rank 52nd in the nation in passing yards allowed per game. So that means good news from Miami's quarterback, Brett Gabbert, who, in my opinion, is a big underprice at only $6,000. If you look what he's done throughout this season, and you look at just what he's done in MAC play, because Miami played a brutal non-conference schedule. They did not have a whole lot of success offensively in those games. You look at just what he's done in MAC play, there are 5 games where he's been over 18 DraftKings points, which is what he would need for 3x value for his salary of $6,000. I really do think the maths on that one. I think it's pretty likely that he ends up being a pretty good value play here. In the first game against Ohio, he threw for 3 touchdowns, 19.62 DraftKings points. No reason to expect that he can't do that again, especially considering he did that on only 21 pass attempts. So I really do think this is a pretty good spot for Gabbert. I think he's one of the better salary saver quarterback value plays on the slate. And I do think that building out a game stack where you play Navarro and Gabbert is absolutely in play, and it's not that expensive at all. Now, at the running back position, the good news is Miami does have a workhorse. This is a super condensed Miami, Ohio offense. Their workhorse is Keon Mazie. He has had over 14 carries in the last 7 games. Pretty consistently, he's been over 9 DraftKings points in every single one of those games. What's weird, though, and this is a super weird stat to me, he has not caught a single pass all season long. He is not used in the passing game at all. He also only has 4 rushing touchdowns. He's not like a super big red zone threat. So like the 2 ways that are like running back cheat codes to score DraftKings points, he doesn't have it. And he's also going against one of the best run defenses in the nation. I don't think that that's a great combination. But yet then when you look at what he did against Ohio the first time, 16 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown, that's 20.1 DraftKings points. That's really good, right? And especially for his salary of $4,500, that's really good. But remember, they were playing most of that game from ahead. They were not playing from behind. So I think that he's a very game flow dependent play. I don't think I would stack him with Gabbert per se, but I do think he is a viable piece of a game stack if you think that Miami can get ahead. And I certainly think he's a viable piece of your player pool because he is only $4,500. And anytime you can get a workhorse running back at $4,500, you got to be a little interested. Now, at the wide receiver position, the good news is that the Redhawks really only throw to 3 guys. And I do mean that in the most literal sense. They only throw to 3 guys. It's kind of insane. The first one is Javon Tracy. He's caught 50 passes on the season. He is now looking at 5 straight games over 17 DraftKings points, just a super consistent play. In that game against Ohio, he had 3 for 24 and a touchdown, 11.4 DraftKings points. I think he's a pretty solid play, very solid part of this receiving core. Virgil is slightly cheaper at $4,800. Virgil is more of a big play guy. He has only caught 39 passes this season, but they have been for 787 yards. Almost has a 20-yard average depth of target. He is the deep threat, which makes him more of a GPP type of play, in my opinion, than Tracy, even though Tracy has probably a higher floor. In that first game against Ohio, Virgil had 3 for 39 and a touchdown, 12.9 DraftKings points. He's certainly in play for me as well. And then Cade McDonald returned from a 4-week absence in the Bowling Green spring game, had 9 for 82 and a touchdown, was their most targeted receiver in that game with 11 targets. You remember, he was their number one receiver at the start of the season before he got hurt. I think there's a chance that he could go back to being that. So he is certainly going to make my player pool as well. All three of these Miami, Ohio receivers are going to make my player pool. And in that game against Ohio, if you were wondering, Cade McDonald was their leading receiver, 5 for 84 and a touchdown, 19.4 DraftKings points. Yes, all three guys that Brett Gabbert ever throws to, Tracy, Virgil, McDonald, they all scored a receiving touchdown in that first game against Ohio. Like I said, all three are going to be in my player pool. I think that Gabbert double stacks with 2 of those 3 are in play. Gabbert single stacks with just 1 of the 3 are in play. And I don't think you can play all 3 of them together. That would be kind of ludicrous. But I do think that all 3 of them have a pathway to success here in this game. If you were to force me to pick, I would probably rank a McDonald 1 overall when you consider his price and what his role in this offense was at the start of the season. And then Virgil more of a GPP play, Tracy more of a cash play. Next up, we have got the Big 12 title game taking place in Dallas between Arizona State and Iowa State, which if you had this as the Big 12 championship game at the start of the season, well, then you need to go play the lottery because it's just, you could not have predicted this, right? Arizona State was not expected to be good coming into the season. Iowa State was expected to be good, but I don't know if they were expected to be this good. Anyway, this is a win and in college football playoff game. So you're going to see all the stops from both these teams. Currently, Arizona State is 2-point favorites with a game total of 50.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 26 to 24 in favor of Arizona State. Now, speaking of those Arizona State Sun Devils, they rank 13th in the nation in rush rate. This is a team that's going to look to do it by running the football. And this is a great match stylistically with what Iowa State does defensively. Iowa State ranks 4th in the nation in passing yards allowed and 94th in the nation in rushing yards allowed. We have talked about this all season long, where Iowa State loves to play this 3-high safety defense, and it takes a number out of the box. But what it says is, we are not letting you throw deep down the field. We are not letting you generate big plays in the passing game. We are going to make you dink and dunk and drive down the field and not make mistakes. And that lends itself, with there being a number out of the box, to getting run on quite easily, but you don't break off explosive runs because there's another safety back there to make a tackle. And it lends itself to not giving up a whole lot of passing yards because you're not giving up chunk plays. And I think that's kind of like playing into Arizona State style. Arizona State is not exactly a big play offense, right? So I think that this is a perfect match for Arizona State. I think this is a good matchup to play these Arizona State guys. Sam Levitt is Arizona State's quarterback. He's up at $7,300, and I got to be honest, I would rather pay down to Gabbert at $6,000 than to play Levitt at $7,300. He's got a little bit of rushing upside, but he hasn't run for a touchdown since week 4. He also is not very likely to hit 300 yards passing. He's only done it once this season. And really, we're going to talk more about the receiving core a little bit later, but I think the receiving options for him do kind of make him more limited as a passer. I'm not all that interested in him at $7,300. Now, Cam Skattebo is the running back for Arizona State. Actually, let's skip over him for a second. We got to talk about this before we do anything else. Jordan Tyson, a receiver who has a 40% target share on this Arizona State team this season. 40% target share is absolutely insane, by the way. Nobody in the NFL is ever over 33. 40% target share this season. He is out for this game and out for the rest of the season. That is big. That is huge. He has been so productive this season for Arizona State. Literally every game since week 6, he's put up at least 19 DraftKings points. You could just put him in your lineup every single week, and he was a good play, right? They don't have him this week. And I think that is going to change this offense drastically, because really the other guys who have been playing at receiver, which is Xavier Guillory, Melquan Stovall, and then the tight end Shimon Mateer, they have not shown an ability to consistently earn targets, and they have not shown an ability to consistently put up fantasy points. So if you're looking for somebody in the offense to replace Tyson, I don't think Guillory or Mateer or Stovall are all of a sudden going to turn into the big target guys, right? Now, there's kind of a whole lot of conjecture about what's going to go on in terms of who's going to replace Jordan Tyson. Jake Smith is a receiver who has played a little bit this season. He's apparently back to practicing and about ready to play. He's supposed to be a starter for this team. I don't think he's the type of guy that can just come in and replace Jordan Tyson. But if he's active, that certainly makes me a little bit intrigued with him at $3,000. There is also Malik McClain, who is redshirting this year. But this game will not count against his red shirt. He's very talented. And he could very well come in if they say, hey, you know what? We're still redshirting you, but you can play in this game. He's the type of guy that could turn in a big game. He's only $3,000 even. But my bet being the guy that could replace Jordan Tyson. Now, I'm not saying that he's instantly just going to come in and be Jordan Tyson with all his 20 DraftKings point performances, but my bet would be Troy Omeire. He is a transfer from Bowling Green that is now taking snaps with the first team in the Jordan Tyson role. He was a number one wide receiver when he was at Bowling Green. So I do think that this is a guy who could look somewhat like an alpha in this offense. And if there's anybody in this Arizona State receiver room that I'm playing, it's going to be Troy Omeire. But let's talk about how that affects the run game. So Cam Skattebo, first off, is Arizona State's second leading receiver on the season. So he has a ton of receiving upside and probably even more if Jordan Tyson is not there to throw to. So what this does for me, Iowa State, is a bad rushing defense, right? But what they could do in this game is they could really load the box and say, hey, we're going to shut down Skattebo. We're not going to let you run, and we're going to force you to throw the ball to these no-name receivers. They could do that. But that's not what they do stylistically. It's just not. They love to play with this 3-high safety defense. They love to force everything underneath, right? So if that's the case and Iowa State sticks true to their style, then Arizona State might hand it to Skattebo 40 times. Like, dead serious, they might do that. He has a track record of doing that this season. He had 36 touches in a game against Mississippi State. Like, he could absolutely touch the ball 30 times in this game. And so I'm kind of more inclined to play Skattebo. Like, I'm not going to fully lock him into my lineups, but I think he's a great play because I think with what Iowa State does defensively, I think it's a great matchup and great time to get him a ton of touches. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the Iowa State side. They're pretty simple. Rocco Becht is their quarterback. He is underpriced at $7,600. I think he's a great play. You look at what he's done recently. He is over 21 DraftKings points in 4 straight games. He's ran for a touchdown in 3 straight. He does have a little bit of rushing upside, and he's also going to have a ton of passing upside. Like, this is a team that is going to look to throw the ball around, right? He's attempted over 33 passes in each of the last 6 games. So I think that the spot is right for this. And Arizona State is a better rush defense than pass defense. They're ranked 22nd in the nation in rush yards allowed, 52nd in the nation or 57th in the nation in passing yards allowed. So this is a good matchup for Becht. At the running back spot, it is a 2-man committee right now between Carson Hansen and Abu Sama. Carson Hansen lately has been seeing more volume, even though Abu Sama did outcarry him by 1 last week. Sama is more likely to break off a big play. Sama is also more likely to be used in the passing game. However, Hansen is absolutely the goal line back. So, like, I don't know, man. Just like, if they're super cheap starting running backs, you can take your pick between the two of them. I do think they're both playable, but that's kind of their profile, right? Like, think about what you're rostering when you do roster. Hansen's the goal line guy that's more volume based. Sama's the big play guy who can catch a little bit of passes. So, like, I think both of them are playable. Don't play them both together, but I do think both of them are rosterable. Now, at the receiver spot, this is the simplest team on the slate when it comes to receiver because they only throw to 2 guys. Literally, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel have accounted for over 2/3 of the total receiving production for the Iowa State team this season, which is a wild statement. Both of them are great. Noel is more of a slot guy, more of a volume guy. Higgins is more of a big play guy. I think you can play them both. I think you can play one. I think you can play a Becht stack with both of them. Like, I think you can play them as one-off plays. I just think they're great. If Iowa State's going to have any success passing, it's going to be to one of those 2 guys. You can certainly play both of them in your lineup. They're 2 of the best wide receiver plays on the slate, in my opinion. All right, game number 3, the one I really want to talk about because, as you can see on YouTube, I am repping my Texas Longhorns today. This is one of the biggest games of the college football season. This is Georgia taking on Texas in the SEC championship game in Atlanta, which is like a de facto home game for Georgia. Texas is currently 2.5-point favorites with a game total of 49.5 points. The implied total is about 26-24 in favor of the Longhorns. These 2 teams met in Austin in October. Georgia won that meeting 30-15, but it was a really goofy game because Texas turned the ball over in their own territory like 2 or 3 times. And really, Georgia didn't put up a whole lot of offensive yards, didn't have a whole lot of offensive success, but they had the short field and they were able to cash in on the short field with those opportunities. And Texas really struggled offensively. They just could not get anything going against Georgia. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this from a DFS perspective. I got to be honest. In my opinion, this is a Wisner or game stack type of game. I am going to be either playing Quintravion Wisner on Texas, or I'm going to be playing a full-blown game stack of both of these teams. And the reason why is because I just, don't see this being a very high-scoring game. because both of these defenses are really good, or B, I see this game just going absolutely bonkers, like a few Georgia games have this season. So speaking of which, let's go ahead and talk about Carson Beck. So Carson Beck and the Georgia Bulldogs, Beck has been playing a lot better recently, especially from a fantasy perspective, over 28 DraftKings points in 3 straight games. And Georgia has certainly been passing the ball more lately. He's had over 31 attempts in all 3 of those games, and they rank 20th in the nation in pass rate right now. However, this Texas defense is really, really good. They rank 1st in the nation in passing yards allowed per game, 13th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game. They just don't give a whole lot, right? But we've seen Georgia get caught up in these shootout type of games like they did against Georgia Tech, and Beck put up 34 DraftKings points in that one. He got caught up in a shootout against Alabama and put up 31 DraftKings points in that one. Mississippi State was a shootout. He put up 32 DraftKings points, right? So to me, the only way I'm going to play Carson Beck against this elite defense, of which he only scored 4.8 DraftKings points against last time, is in a full-blown game stack where I'm going to play both sides of this game and hope and pray that this game shoots out, because I do think that there's a chance that it happens, because Georgia has had a few of those so far this season. At the running back position, Trevor Etienne would be a big help for Georgia if he could play. He did have 7 for 31 in that first game against Texas. Not great. I don't think he plays. Nate Frazier is the backup. I don't think he's a great play going up against Texas. Even if Etienne's out, I still don't think he's a good play. If Etienne's in, I think he's not a good play at all. So I'm just not playing him. Roderick Robinson is back in the backfield. He had 4 carries in that Georgia Tech game. Also caught 2 passes. Took a little bit away from Nate Frazier's workload. But I don't want to play any of these Georgia running backs against this Texas defense. Now, the wide receiver position. Arian Smith has been under much scrutiny lately because he has been seemingly always open but always dropping the ball. He is their big play threat. He could absolutely cash in a bomb in this game. And we've seen him do it this season, right? 28 DraftKings points against Bama, 27 against Mississippi State, 23 against UMass. He could absolutely catch a few bombs here in this one. But I don't think it's highly likely. I think he's a viable GPP play because of his ability to catch bombs. Dominic Lovett is probably the most steady of the Georgia receivers this season. He is playing the slot. He's in more of the Lad McConkey role from last year, where he's getting a lot of these short and intermediate targets, scoring touchdowns off of them. Against Texas, the first time he had 4 for 35. To me, if there's any Georgia receiver that's playable, it's him. I also really like Colby Young, though. Colby Young is a big body, physical type of wide receiver. He's only $3,300, and apparently there's a chance that he could play in this game. I don't think it's likely, but if he does play, I think he's instantly the best play for Georgia on this side. But like I said, I'm really only interested in playing Beck and maybe Smith or Levitt or Young in just a game stack type of lineup. So who would we stack on the Texas side? Well, Quinn Ewers is the starting quarterback still, even though they are bringing in Arch Manning to run. And this Georgia defense is a little more vulnerable than in years past. Georgia ranks 44th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 50th in the nation in passing yards allowed. But Steve Sarkisian, he's really kind of put this offense in a box lately. And what I mean by that is he's brought in Arch Manning to do these obvious QB run stuff. And he's had Ewers in the game and just handed the ball off a lot, not really thrown it a whole lot, because basically he knows that his defense is so good. And especially when he has a lead in the second half, if he just hands the ball off to Quintravion Wisner 3 times in a row and punts, his defense is going to get a stop and they're going to win the game, right? So this offense has been super duper conservative recently because of that. Ewers, in my opinion, I think he is not the style of quarterback that is best going up against this Georgia team. We saw Haynes King in the quarterback run game absolutely kill Georgia when Georgia played Georgia Tech last week. That's not Ewers. That would be Arch Manning. But Ewers is the starter, not Arch Manning, so we have to base it off of that, right? The first game against Georgia, Ewers only put up 12 DraftKings points. I view Ewers very much in the same prism that I view Carson Beck as. Game stack only type of play, because we've seen these games where Ewers can randomly throw 5 touchdowns like he did against Florida, but we're going to need the game to shoot out if we want to get that type of passing volume from him. At the running back position, Quintravion Wisner is a great play, in my opinion. He is seeing a ton of carries for this Texas team. 26 against Kentucky, 33 against Texas A&M, over 150 yards rushing in both of those games, over 25 DraftKings points in both those games, and he's only scored 1 touchdown combined in both those games. He's just a great play. No matter who the defense is right now, they're going to be giving the ball to Wisner a ton. Jaden Blue is questionable, and I don't really think that affects Wisner a lot at all, because even with Blue active the last 2 games, Wisner has still seen a huge workload. So I think that Wisner is a really solid play, and I think he's the one guy from this game that is playable outside of game stack. If you were looking to stack the Texas receivers up, there is now a much more clear pecking order than there was at the start of the season. Gunnar Helm is the tight end one, very clearly. He is going to see a decent amount of volume. He's Quinn Ewers' security blanket this year. He's not like a super high upside guy. Like, he's not going to catch bombs. He's not going to break off big, long runs after catch, but he's going to see some volume. He's only $4,000. He's a playable piece. Matthew Golden has emerged as kind of like this secondary option in the receiving core. He's been over double-digit DraftKings points in 4 straight games. He's scored 4 touchdowns over that span. $4,100. I think he's a solid option. And then Isaiah Bond is the guy that we know as the alpha wide receiver one in this Texas offense, who hasn't really produced like it in the last 3 games. Like I said, I'm playing those 3 receivers in game stack lineups, but I'm probably not touching them and not considering them unless I'm totally stacking up both the Texas and the Georgia sides in this game. All right, that does it for the first 3 games. And holy crap, we went a lot longer on that than I thought we would. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to break down the last 3. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I tweet out all updates for the show, as well as I'm more than happy to answer any lineup questions that you might have if you reach out to me on Twitter. I'm recording this here on a Wednesday night. Obviously, the games kick off on Saturday, so sometimes opinions change. We get updates on players and stuff like that. You want to know what I think? Reach out to me on Twitter. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. The Fantasy Corner Discord is a 100% free community with a lot of really good people and really smart people who play DFS for a lot of different sports, and they're just in there all day talking plays, talking lineups, talking strategy. I'm talking for college football, college basketball, NFL, NBA, MLB. We got it all covered in the Fantasy Corner Discord. And so if you're just looking for people to talk DFS with, or looking for people to kind of sweat it out and, brag about lineups with, or talk about, the players with, it's just a great spot to be in, and I cannot recommend it enough. And then if you want to know who actually makes all of my lineups on these college football DFS slates, for my I write an article every single week for my Patreon where I profile all of my core plays as well as why they're my core plays. And so you can get that information on the Patreon. I can't sit here and guarantee that you can just plug all those guys in and instantly win a ton of money. It's not that easy. Anyone who does promise you that is lying to you. What I can promise is that you can get well-researched, well-thought-out takes from somebody who understands DFS and understands college football and can help you improve your DFS game in the process. All right, let's go ahead and continue with the next game, which is going to be the Fun Belt. Marshall taking on Louisiana. This one is on campus at Louisiana. Louisiana is 5.5-point favorites with a game total of 56.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-26 in favor of the Raging Cajuns. This is tied for the highest total on the slate, so this is a great game environment. And also, I got to be honest, the Sun Belt is like the only conference that still does divisions now. This feels a little lopsided. I feel like the other best teams in this conference, just from my perception from watching them, were Texas State and South Alabama, and they're on the same west side with Louisiana, and so they weren't eligible for this game. Marshall beat JMU last week in overtime to clinch their spot in this game. I thought JMU was one of the better teams in the conference, so I really think you have the best team in the conference in Louisiana taking on like the 5th or 6th best team in the conference in Marshall. I personally don't think this game is going to be very close. I think Louisiana is going to win this one quite easily. On the Marshall side, let's go ahead and talk about them. It's a team that wants to run the football, especially since Braylon Braxton, a very mobile quarterback, has taken over. Marshall ranks 18th in the nation in rush rate, which is a good match stylistically for Louisiana because they rank 78th in rushing yards allowed. It's quite bad, and only 26th in passing yards allowed. But Louisiana, they win games off of their offense, not their defense. Braxton is the mobile quarterback that I mentioned, and he's pretty good. He's been over double-digit rushing attempts in 6 straight games. He's also been pretty successful in DraftKings in those games. Of those 6 games, of which, if we go back all the way to his time as a starter, starting with the App State game, he has 4 games over 23 DraftKings points, which is pretty solid. I think that he's more than anything to me here on this slate, I think he's a game stack play. I don't necessarily see Braxton having a lot of success and like the Louisiana offense not having success. I think Braxton's success would be, hey, Marshall's trailing in this game. They're going to ask him to drop back quite a bit. He has potential to scramble. He has potential to, pass, obviously. So I think that he's more of a game stack quarterback play than anything else. But $7,100 is not an unreasonable price tag, in my opinion. At the running back position, it's a 2-headed monster between A.J. Turner and Jordan Houston. A.J. Turner is like the big play threat guy. But here's the thing. He hasn't broken off any big plays since the Georgia State game in Week 8. Jordan Houston is an NC State transfer. He is the other back. He is kind of the plotter, the 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of guy that generally doesn't see more volume than Turner, but like his volume is more like just shorter plays, shorter yardage, and maybe he scores touchdowns. Like, I don't think he's necessarily a high upside play at all. He's only been over 13 DraftKings points once all season. I don't really think either of these running backs are great plays, honestly. I think if I were to play anybody from this Marshall offense, it would start with Braylon Braxton, and then it would carry on to the wide receiver position. So Christian Fitzpatrick has been the number one wide receiver for this Marshall team all season long, but like, I think he's overpriced on DraftKings. He's up at $5,600, which means you need about 17 DraftKings points for him to hit 3x value. And that is a total that he's only hit twice all season. And it was in week 1 and week 2. So like, he hasn't really been a viable DraftKings receiver anytime since. And we know that Braxton is more of a runner than a thrower anyway. I would rather not pay up to him. I would rather pay down to one of the receivers that he is targeting lately, like Carl Chester, who's had 10 total catches in the last 4 games, double-digit DraftKings points in the last 2. Or you have Chuck Montgomery down here at $3,400, who has been over double-digit DraftKings points in 3 of the last 5. So I really think that when you look at price, Chester and Montgomery are better stacking partners than Fitzpatrick. On the Louisiana side, this is an offense that you're going to want to target. They have been playing backup quarterback Chandler Fields in the last 3 weeks. He's been their starter, and they have not missed a beat. They did lose that game to South Alabama in his first start, but South Alabama, like I said, is a good team. But Chandler Fields has been, in his 3 starts, 20, 26, 14 DraftKings points. Not a high volume passer. The maximum pass attempts he's had is 26, which is not a lot in college football. He has been a positive rusher in that time, but not really any huge games on the ground. I think he's a decent play at 6,800 because I don't think the Marshall defense is very good. That Marshall defense ranks 113th in rushing yards allowed and 39th in passing yards allowed. So certainly more of a run funnel, which I think plays into the hands of the 2 Louisiana running backs because they have certainly upped their rush rate in the time that Chandler Fields has been a starter. Bill Davis is their number 1 running back. In the time since Fields has been a starter, he's had 3 games over 15 DraftKings points. He's only $4,900. So that would be solid value right there if he just puts that up. And I think there's a high chance that he does. Zillin Perry, in the time that Fields has been a starter, 11.8 and 29 DraftKings points. Randomly against Louisiana Monroe, he had 19 carries for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't know if that's a trend that's going to continue or not, but he's only $3,600, and Louisiana is one of the highest team totals on the slate. This is like not a bad upside GPP play in my opinion, even though I do think that Bill Davis is very clearly the better play when you look at his body of work over the course of the entire season. But like I said, with Louisiana turned into more of a running team with Fields at quarterback, with Marshall being a team that struggles to defend the run outside the top 100, I do think that both those 2 running backs are great plays here on this slate. Now, at the wide receiver position, Lance Legendre has been the number 1 wide receiver for Louisiana since Fields has taken over. In those 3 games, he has caught 17 total passes, scored 2 touchdowns, been over 13 DraftKings points in all 3 games. I don't necessarily think that you have to play Chandler Fields at quarterback to play Legendre. Like, honestly, with Louisiana implied 31 points, you can play Bill Davis and Lance Legendre pretty cheap, and if those are the guys that score the touchdowns, you're going to be in business. Now, Terrence Carter was the number 1 wide receiver for this team before Chandler Fields took over, but for whatever reason, he has just not had the eyes of Fields going to him, right? Like 5 for 41 against South Alabama, 5 for 63 against Troy, 2 for 27 against UL Monroe. So he's very steadily a part of the game plan, but he hasn't scored a touchdown. He hasn't had a massive game. So I do think he's playable, but I do think Legendre is very clearly the better play. And then like we talked about, with this being a super low volume passing offense, I don't necessarily think you have to get to any of these other pass catchers, right? Like Robert Williams is a guy that is going to play, but not going to have like a super big role. And then Tavion Smith is another guy who is playing and scored touchdowns in back-to-back games, but like I think that's kind of fluky. So like I really would just be considering Legendre and Carter from his passing offense. Next up, we've got the ACC championship game in my native state of North Carolina being played in Charlotte. We've got Clemson taking on SMU. SMU is 2.5-point favorites with a game total of 56.5 points, meaning the implied total is 29-27 in favor of the Mustangs. This is like the most interesting game of the day, in my opinion, because not only is it like a very simple win and in, lose and out for Clemson, but SMU, like, I sure hope the committee doesn't punish them for losing this game. Like, if SMU ends up losing this game and they end up out of the college football playoff, that is just wholly unfair, in my opinion, that they could fall behind a team like an Alabama or a Miami or an Ole Miss when they played a game this weekend and those guys didn't. Like, to me, there should be value in playing in this game. And I would really feel for SMU if it affected their college football playoff status if they lost this game. So guess what? Because there's that fear that they might lose it and lose their playoff spot, they're going to go out and they're going to try to win this game. And I think this is going to be a pretty good game. Like, honestly, that this game has the tied for the highest game total on the slate. There's going to be some offensive points scored in this one. On the Clemson side, SMU ranks as a really good run defense. They are 9th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 92nd in the nation in passing yards allowed. But when you look at that, I think that it's largely because of who they played. They played a lot of teams who are not really good runners of the football. And so naturally, the rushing numbers are going to look better than their passing numbers, right? And so what does that mean for Clemson? Well, I think Cade Klubnik is a solid play. We've been talking about him all season long, and he's been a solid play literally since the Georgia game. He's just been great in almost every game. Last 3 games, he's been over 22 DraftKings points in all 4 of them. Granted, we want a little more than that, but he's been over 28 in 2 of the last 3. He does have rushing upside. He has literally run for about 50 yards rushing per game this season. Got multiple passing touchdown upside. In a game environment that's going to be one of the best of the slate, I really do like Cade Klubnik at $9,000. If you're looking to pay up for any quarterback on this slate, I would probably personally prefer Klubnik and Navarro to any of the other options. We've already talked about Navarro. He's Ohio's quarterback. Now, at the running back position, Phil Mafah is still the workhorse for this Clemson backfield. Not had a lot of success in the last 3 weeks. Last 3 weeks, he has carried the ball 40 times and is not over 100 yards rushing. Has not scored a touchdown. He's literally combined for 15 DraftKings points in the last 3 games. But like we talked about, I think this SMU defense is like fake good against the run. And I think a lot of people on DraftKings are going to avoid him because of his salary and what he's done recently. But when you look at the Phil Mafah we were getting in the middle of the season, that Phil Mafah is still in there. And there's a chance he could be that Phil Mafah again. I think he is playable with Cade Klubnik. I think he is playable as a one-off piece. I think he's playable as a game stack piece because it's quite likely that if Clemson is scoring touchdowns, Mafah's going to be one of them. Now, the good news is that this Clemson receiving core is getting a lot easier to read, and they're also quite cheap to target. Antonio Williams is really turning into their wide receiver 1. He's been great over the last 7 weeks, 8 weeks, pretty much. A double-digit DraftKings points in all 8 of those games. Over 20 DraftKings points in 4 of them. And it's been because he's moved to the slot and he just sees a ton of volume from that slot. He's become Cade Klubnik's favorite target. I think he's obviously the Clemson receiver that you want to target as a wide receiver 1, but I don't think you have to play Antonio Williams. I think you can play some other Clemson receivers. You've got Jake Brenningstool, the tight end, who's just a consistent part of the offense week in and week out. Bryant Wesco Jr. is one of their talented freshmen who is now starting out wide. The last 3 games, 3 for 61, 3 for 75, and a touchdown, 5 for 67. He's steadily a part of the game plan, and he's only $3,400. And then the other wide starting receiver is TJ Moore, who is a 5-star freshman. And last game against South Carolina, he had 6 for 65, 12.5 DraftKings points. I think that you can play any of these Clemson receivers with Klubnik. I think that you could even play 2 of them if you wanted. I think you can play any of them as one-off plays. I'm certainly going to be playing Williams, Wesco, and TJ Moore in a lot of lineups here this week. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the SMU side. So Kevin Jennings, all season long, we've talked about how he is underpriced, how he has overproduced for his price tag, and how he has been super highly owned because his price just does not match his production. And I believe that that is the case here again this week. He's only $6,900. I think that he's one of the better mid-range quarterback plays on the slate. He routinely beats this price tag in terms of what he does from a value perspective. And Clemson is not like some scary matchup. They're ranked 42nd in the nation in rushing yards allowed, 60th in the nation in passing yards allowed. And Jennings is like routinely passing for 300 yards. Literally, in the last 4 games, 225 against Cal, but that he really wasn't needed to throw. 323 against UVA, 298 against Boston College, 306 against Pitt. Like, he is just throwing for a ton of yards, right? And also he has rushing upside, but he hasn't really used it recently. So that's kind of like some untapped potential. I think that Jennings is a great play in all formats this week. At the running back position, Brashad Smith is their workhorse running back. Personally, I see him as being a little touchdown dependent. Like, you look at his big games, they're all when he scores multiple touchdowns, or when he breaks off long runs, or when he's used in the passing game. So, like, yes, he kind of does have all the running back cheat codes to scoring fantasy points. He's used in the passing game. He scores touchdowns. He breaks off long runs. But, like, I don't know, $8,200 is a lot to pay. I think that personally on this slate, I would personally rather pay up for Scattaboo or pay down for Maffa than to play Smith. But I think that a lot of other people are going to feel that way as well. So I think he's probably going to come in pretty lowly owned, which makes him a very intriguing GPP running back play. At the wide receiver position, SMU, we've talked about it all season long. They've played this huge rotation of guys. It's starting to get a little more condensed, and I am starting to kind of like playing these SMU receivers. Jordan Hudson is really looking like the wide receiver one. He came in questionable last week, didn't really play a full game. If he's back full strength, he should absolutely pay off his price tag at $4,400. Keyshawn Smith is kind of like a low upside play. Like he's regularly involved in the game plan, but he doesn't have any like monster games. He's only $4,200. Roderick Daniels is the guy who's seen the most consistent volume recently, 4, 5, and 6 catches in the last 3 weeks. He's a guy that I'm absolutely considering at $4,000. He's probably my favorite play among these SMU receivers. And then you also have the tight end Matthew Hibner, who is replacing the RJ Maryland role. He has scored touchdowns in 3 straight games, so he has to be considered. And then Moochie Dixon at $3,300 is also a guy who is going to play a little bit in this SMU offense, but it's going to be those 5 guys. It's not like this big rotation of like 8 or 9 like it was last year. Thank the Lord. And like I said, if I had to rank it, I would personally go Daniels 1, Hudson 2, Hibner 3. That's just how I'm going to be playing those guys this week. Now, last game of the night, we've got Penn State taking on Oregon, and I got to be honest, I don't know if Penn State's any good. I honestly don't. They've lost to Ohio State, who I also don't know if they're any good. They have not played Indiana. They have barely beaten some of the worst teams in the Big Ten. I don't know if they're any good, personally. And personally, like I really think in terms of watching the games, I think that Notre Dame is a much better team than Penn State from what I've seen. Notre Dame, since the loss to Northern Illinois, say what you want about that game, but what's the difference in Notre Dame losing by 2 to Northern Illinois off of a really long field goal or Penn State barely beating Bowling Green? Like the only difference is whether or not they actually won the game because of a field goal kicker. But Notre Dame has dominated teams ever since that loss, and Penn State has not. So I personally think Oregon is going to boat race Penn State in this game because I don't think Penn State's any good. Actually, I don't know if Oregon's any good. I don't know if anybody's any good. We're going to find out over the next few weeks who's good, though. So anyway, in this game, Oregon is 3.5-point favorites. Game total 49.5 points. Projected total is Oregon 26 to 23. And like I said, I think there's a chance Oregon can blow them out. On the Penn State side, we've got Drew Allar at quarterback. He's too expensive. I've said this all season long. He doesn't have a lot of passing volume. This is a team that loves to run the football. He doesn't have a lot of rushing upside. He doesn't have a whole lot of games where he hits value for his fantasy score. He's not going to be in my player pool at the quarterback position. If you want to talk yourself into it because he's going to be lowly owned and because there's a chance he could be like a game stack type play, knock yourself out, but he's not going to make my player pool. At the running back spot, so this is interesting. So Nick Singleton, we've been over these running backs before. It's Singleton and Allen. It's a committee, but this is one of the running back committees where I'm willing to play them because they both see consistent volume, right? But the weird thing is that Singleton's profile of, breaking off long runs, being used in the passing game, his profile is much better suited to be a GPP type of play in a DFS setting where he has a much higher ceiling. But because of the production and because he's generally been more productive, he ends up being super highly owned. And Katron Allen is the guy that ends up being a better GPP play because nobody plays Katron Allen. And really, when you look at the recent games, the volume has been fairly consistent, close to a 50-50 split, but Singleton's just been a lot more successful. So everybody's going to play Singleton in this game. I think you can play Allen. I think he's a better GPP play, not because of what he profiles of as a runner, but because he's going to be 2% owned versus Singleton being 18% owned. And obviously those are just rough numbers. It's a Wednesday. I'm not here to try to project ownership, but I would rather play a 2% Allen than an 18% Singleton when there's still a 50-50 committee. That's just how I see it. Now, at the wide receiver spot, we only need to talk about one guy for Penn State. That's Tyler Warren. He's their tight end. They use him as a wildcat quarterback. They get him the ball just as many opportunities as they possibly can. He's $7,700, which is crazy expensive, but they just find a way to get this man touches. And he has a ton of touchdown upside because they run that wildcat package in the red zone. They also throw to him in the red zone. They'll throw fades. They'll throw these little crosser routes. They look to get this man the ball, especially in the red zone. And to me, that makes him playable at $7,700. But because they're a low passing volume offense and because Warren and the running backs are going to be scoring all the touchdowns, I have no interest in any of the other Penn State receivers. Now, on the Oregon side, I got to be honest, Dylan Gabriel, $8,600. I'm not interested. I'm just not. I've kind of faded Dillon Gabriel all season long, and the only time it really came back to bite me was the game against Ohio State. I think that he is generally priced up too much for what this Oregon offense is asking him to do. It's not asking him to be a runner. It's not asking him to throw the ball deep down the field. He's basically just the point guard out there, dinking and dunking, and he doesn't score a whole lot of touchdowns. He doesn't run the ball a whole lot. I'm failing to see the upside for why I should play him at $8,600. I would rather pay up for Klubnik or pay down for Navarro, two guys that I've seen have much higher ceilings throughout the course of the season, and are also not going up against the Penn State defense, by the way, because the Penn State defense, everything that I just said about them, Penn State can play some defense. They rank 6th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game and 7th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game. So this is not a great matchup for Gabriel. What I do think will happen is I do think that this could be the Jerome James show. He's a really good running back for Oregon. He's been over 25 DraftKings points in each of the last 2 games. They look to get him the football early and often. He is used in the passing game because, like I said, this is like a check down, dink and dunk offense. And he also is just very good. $7,700 is a very reasonable price tag to pay. I do like James here on this slate. The backup, Noah Whittington, I think is like, I really would personally play him in like a blowout type of environment. This is not that, because I don't think they're going to totally blow out Penn State, but I do think they're going to win this game quite easily. At the wide receiver position, Tez Johnson has been the number 1 wide receiver for Oregon, but much like with Dillon Gabriel, like if you faded him all season long, he's probably only made you pay for it like twice. He's not a super high volume guy. He's a big play guy. And they don't break off a whole lot of big plays. So, like, I would personally rather pay down to Evan Stewart, who is not that far behind him in terms of a target distribution, but he's only $3,900 on DraftKings. It's a whole lot easier to hit value when you're $3,900 as opposed to when you're $7,000. The tight end, Terrence Ferguson, I think is a game stack play only. He's a very touchdown-dependent play. He's $3,100. If you want to get him in there, I wouldn't complain about it. But like I said, he's very touchdown-dependent. Stewart is my favorite option in this Oregon receiver. All right, that is going to do it for this Conference Championship Saturday slate. Hopefully we gave you guys all the information that you need in order to build some winning lineups here on DraftKings and FanDuel for this Saturday slate. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button so that way it just helps me out so much when you guys do that. It helps the podcast show up on searches, helps, build the community, helps people find the video. It really just shows some appreciation back to me if I have helped you out in any way. And I really do appreciate it. I cannot stress that enough. If you're listening on audio, you can do the same by rating and reviewing. Again, just helps the podcast show up in searches, helps grow the community. And I cannot stress enough how much I appreciate it. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. Remember, if you do want more from me, follow me on Twitter, join the Fantasy Corner Discord, head on over to Patreon for the core plays. Obviously I am a Texas fan. This is like a very conflicting week with them being in the SEC championship, because I feel like if they lose this game, they will be the 5 seed, which, like, my personal opinion, I think the 5 seed is exactly where you want to be this season, because you'll get that first round game against the Big 12 winner. You'll get the second round game against likely Boise. And I would much rather have that path than be the 2 seed and have to play Notre Dame in the second round. Like I said, Notre Dame scares me. Notre Dame's very good, and I think they're a team that's going to make some noise in the playoff. And as a Texas fan, I'm kind of conflicted in terms of whether I want them to actually win this game or not, which is not a feeling that I should have on Conference Championship Saturday. So it's just a weird week. I'm very much looking forward to watching, very much looking forward to the college football playoff. Like I said, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That way you can be with us for the college football playoff. I guess I do need to make an official pick as a Texas fan for this SEC championship game. I'm going to say that Georgia is going to win. I think that when Georgia is playing their best football, I think that they're the best team in the country. We just don't see them play their best football very often. Well, they did it against Texas last time, and I think they will do it against Texas again. But other than that, I'm very much looking forward to watching the games. I've no confidence in my own team this time around, which is not a position I'm usually in. I usually do have confidence in my own team. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. So anyway, best of luck to you guys here on this Saturday DraftKings slate. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time. The next time you guys will see me talking about college football, we're going to be talking about bowls and the college football playoff, which is exciting. So thank you guys, and I will see you guys next time. And as always, hook 'em.